Hi, it's Allison Corbin with Big Sky Economic Development, and I'm also joined by Karen Miller. We're coming to you today to talk through some of the initial findings from the economic impact of COVID-19. We're going to jump into some slides here to walk through the data that we found so far. So first of all, we want to walk through some of the initial considerations that we have when it comes to COVID-19 and how we wrap our arms around what the impact will be to our community. So the first thing that we want to consider is how this impact to our community, how it's going to behave. So there are different schools of thought around what will happen to our economy during and after the COVID-19 crisis. And those opinions vary. But one thing that we'd like to explore is how this will behave either like a recession or a natural disaster. And there are schools of thought for both. But we'll touch on more of the natural disaster side in a second, because there are similarities to the economy that we had going into this event, and then how our economy has been impacted in a very sharp, sudden way. So I'll talk about that in just a second. The second thing, and I think many of you realize this, is that policy and duration are king and queen. So when we talk about policy, this has to do with how quickly did governments put people in a shelter-in-place status? How quickly were businesses closed? While that has been proven to be good for health outcomes, or they believe it will be good for health outcomes, the sooner that those businesses were closed, the more economic impact there will be to potential job loss. And duration, of course, is the big unknown that everyone's trying to answer right now, is how long will we be in shelter in place? Also, how long will businesses either be closed or having to operate in a limited capacity? And finally, we've yet to see what the speed and effectiveness of federal programs will be, both at the federal level and the state level. So at the federal level, it's many of those loans that are going to small businesses. And then at the state level, we have the unemployment. So we're seeing how those are deployed and how that impacts our community and our businesses' ability to access capital to continue to pay employees and keep their doors open in limited capacities, or keep their doors open entirely when we're talking about essential businesses. So let's start by talking about this as if it were a disaster. When a disaster happens, and I'll use an example of a hurricane, you have your existing baseline economy that's plugging along. Then a disaster happens and there's an abrupt interruption. So businesses close immediately, there's huge infrastructure damage, and really business cannot operate as normal in any capacity after the event. When you look at a recession, recessions are typically long and drawn out. So there's a slowing of business activity, there's a slowing of economic activity that leads to an eventual recession. So there are things about the COVID-19 crisis that are very akin to a disaster. We went from business as usual, at least here in Montana, business as usual in the beginning of March, to suddenly most of them closed, and then that order was even strengthened a couple weeks later. So it was a very sudden loss of revenue and business stopping point. So in that way, it's very similar to a disaster. When we look at how economic recovery occurs, disasters are slightly different because they have infrastructure needs that need to be met in order to regain business as usual. So if there's an example of a hurricane, there's significant, the businesses are run down, they were hit by a hurricane, there's flooding. So there's actual physical infrastructure damage. This provides an opportunity for their economic recovery because of the money that comes to rebuild. So the actual rebuilding is critical to communities that have experienced disaster. So we don't have that rebuilding component when it comes to COVID-19 because our infrastructure is still there. Our businesses are physically still standing. It's a matter of how this restarts. There's a couple of points I think that are worth looking at because of the sharp and sudden nature of both a disaster when compared to this COVID-19 instance. So Hurricane Harvey that occurred a couple of years ago had a pretty significant impact on 41 counties in Texas. And this chart that you see with the lime green line and the dotted line are for Aransas County, Texas, so one of the most dramatically impacted. The lime green line shows what happened to unemployment because of Hurricane Harvey. So you see that sharp increase. It went from, very moderate unemployment rate, basically doubled in a very short time, similar to what we're having experienced with COVID-19. But as you can see, they plotted with the dotted line what they would have anticipated the unemployment rate to look like over time. And within a year, those two lines are meeting. So within a year, that county had recovered to the same unemployment level that you would have anticipated had the disaster not happened. Another interesting point is that hurricanes impacted by Hurricane Harvey in Texas had about an 85% business reopen rate. And that varied by county depending on industry, but it really ranged from about 12 to 15% of businesses that were closed indefinitely. When you look at Katrina, the numbers are a little different. They experienced only a 65% business reopening rate. Katrina was a more dramatic experience, and also the deployment of federal funds was different. But Hurricane Harvey, it was quick response. There was a lot of federal funds that went into that area to help them rebuild. What's also going to be a little bit different is that the whole nation is in this disaster, and so the concentration of funds into one area will not occur. It'll be dispersed. While there may be more concentration in areas such as New York or Seattle that have been greatly impacted, the disbursement of those funds nationwide are going to be spread out. So you won't have as large of a capital infusion immediately as you would if this was in one concentrated area, or the example of Harvey in just 41 counties. So that's something to think about, but I like thinking about this as a disaster just because of the sudden nature of it. We had a strong economy going into it, things were performing, and I think, to me at least, it gives me some hope as long as we approach this correctly, we work to have reopened strategies that potentially we will be looking back a year from now and seeing that our unemployment rate has recovered and that life will be different, but that there'll be a greater degree of recovery than if there's going to be a long drawn out recession. So data that we actually have, this is the economic injury form data that we received from businesses. Big Sky Economic Development asked businesses to fill them out in order for us to demonstrate that our community had indeed endured an emergency. And of course, we got that designation. But we received about 260 of these forms. From these, there was a total job loss reported of 1,449 jobs, with another 1,000 jobs that were uncertain as far as the future of them. The loss rate, so if we just looked at the total reported jobs that would be lost versus the number of people employed before the incident or before closures, there is a 36% job loss rate. The majority of the respondents in this data, and you can go to the next slide, were food and retail and bar and casino. So you can see the top folks that responded, so the number of respondents that we got in those industries, that 36% number may be one that holds true, especially for the industries that are most impacted. And so we'll be interested to see moving forward as we continue to reach out to the business community and receive data from them, how this performs and what industries on the ground are reporting the significant job loss. So since this is the only local first source of data that we have, we've turned to national economists, one and specifically Chimera Analytics, who has done some analysis around what makes communities vulnerable to economic impacts from COVID. And so this next map that you'll see speaks to that directly. So this shows economic vulnerability by county. And you'll notice that Yellowstone County is a deep red. We are pretty vulnerable. Many of those elements are because we are a regional hub. So we're a regional hub for services, and services is largely what's been the most impacted and experienced the most interruption. To the next slide. So here's the list of the 10 most vulnerable industries ranked by what will be most impacted. So as you can see, arts, entertainment, recreation, that also includes tourism and folks coming to our community. Accommodation and food services, wholesale trade, transportation and warehousing, all of which are a big part of our economy and ones that make it so we have that higher vulnerability index. In order to really maintain a wider lens, though, to not just focus on Billings in a vacuum of what's happening to us, we took a look at our rank versus our our peers. So our peer communities, this is a set of communities that we consistently compare ourselves to in economic data and performance. And so I grabbed all of those to say, how are we ranking among our peers? And you'll notice that our impact is pretty significant. So this rank on the far side is out of 3,141 counties. So we are in the top 10% of those most impacted or those most vulnerable based on our industry mix. You can see places like Boise, of course, have a much, much larger impact or more vulnerable industries, but we are right up there. And again, I think that comes a lot from being a regional hub. When it comes to Bozeman, I think a lot of that's going to be about tourism, arts, and recreation. So that's why you see them having that big hit. So on our next slide, I actually dive into data specific to Yellowstone County. So this is ranked in order of vulnerability as Chimera defined it. So these are the top 10 most vulnerable industries in order of vulnerability. And from their recommendation, what we've done is take a look at those industries for us, so arts, entertainment, and recreation, and accommodation and food services. And we have the total employment on this the first bar column. And then what we've done is looked at what the potential job loss could be in that industry. So Chimera is saying that in these two industries, they anticipate between 40 and 80% job loss. We figured this at about a 60% job loss just to take kind of that middle road. But it does give you an idea of how significant job loss could be in these industries, depending on a lot of those factors I talked about earlier. We also, when you look at this total job loss number, if this were to hold true, and of course this is preliminary, this is just analysis, thinking through analysis, this would be about an 8% loss in jobs, total jobs in our community. There's also a lot of conversation around how healthcare will be impacted. At first, when you think about this crisis, you think healthcare will be better and be stronger because they'll be helping save lives. But unfortunately, that's not the case because so many healthcare services that are not critical are being reduced and cut. And so there's the anticipation that there will be a reduction and a constriction in the healthcare industry. The analysis folks that we lean on for the percentages to really look at haven't landed on what they believe that will be. But preliminary conversations, if we were to look at even just a 20% loss in the healthcare industry in our community, that would represent another 2,900 jobs, leaving us with about 11,000 or 11% job loss between those three industries alone. So you can, on the next slide, which gives a little bit more hope, a little less grim. So this is looking at our top 10 employers with the vulnerability index overlaid by color. So the red industries are the most vulnerable, then orange, then yellow, then green. And so you can see these are our top 10 industries by employment, so our top 10 employing industries, and then where they lie on that vulnerability. And it's encouraging because it's not like our top 10 are all red, so that's a plus. And while we have a few of them, we also have a few that should weather this storm relatively well. So that's definitely an encouraging point. And so that's just a quick overview of what we're analyzing right now. And now Karen's going to jump into some hard numbers that we have from unemployment insurance or unemployment claims that'll give you some more true data on what we know as a status as of today.
Okay, thanks, Allison. So just a heads up, the information we're going to be looking at over the next slides, it's all pulled from the Department of Labor website. So if you want these, and they're doing a great job of keeping these updated every week. So if you want these numbers, then I would recommend you go to the DLI website. That's dli.mt.gov so that you can keep these updated numbers for yourselves. But what you're looking at right here is a daily graph of the unemployment insurance claims that are being issued on a daily basis. So we're starting at the beginning of the year for January, ending up around April 8th. And these include everything. So this is not just initial claims. This is redetermination, reactivation of old claims. And this is also showing you actually when those unemployed participants are filing for payment. So if you look at this, blue is when somebody is filing a brand new claim. So that's an initial claim. That red is redetermination. That yellow is reactivating an old claim. And then that green are people who are actually filing for a payment request. So this is now looking at Montana. So we're going to the state of Montana, and these are the number of Montanans filing an initial unemployment insurance claim. So these are people who were not on unemployment who are filing for the first time. And this is going back to 2016. And obviously you can see relatively steady patterns from 2016 to 2019. And then of course, because of our situation, you see there at the right around March, April of 2020, we have a huge spike. So at the top there, it's saying that we had 26,457 initial claims for the most recent file week, which was ending April 4th. So now this is the same data, but looking at those who were filing continued unemployment insurance claims. So again, you can see relatively steady pattern there from 2016 to 2019, and then again, a huge spike, and they're looking at 50,213 continued claims of the week ending April 4th. Okay, so as you might have seen in the press release from Montana Works and the Department of Labor and Industry, they were looking at not necessarily the amount of people, but the total payments that were issued for the week of March 29th through April 5th. And so what we're looking at here are the totals of each of those days, the total payments in actual dollars, and then the total number of payments. So again, this isn't how many people were filing for unemployment, but the actual payments that were being issued. So over this 5-day period, Montana actually issued over $7.8 million in unemployment claims for over 24,000 claims for that 5-day period. Okay, so another thing that we're paying attention to in addition to unemployment claims are actually how many layoff events are reported. So oftentimes job service hears of unemployment layoffs that are happening because they have a quick response to come in and help with that. So they oftentimes hear of events happening and taking place. So this is a collection of that. It's starting in May of 2018 and then going projected out through May of 2020, as you can see here. That green line is showing the number of business layoff events that are happening, and obviously a huge spike during our current period. And then the blue line is showing the number of workers affected by those layoffs. And so just a heads up, these numbers are definitely not accurate because we do not know the exact number of layoffs happening or businesses laying off their workers. This is just the data that is sent into the job service and Montana Department of Labor and Industry. So this is probably actually low in comparison to what we're actually experiencing here. And again, this is for the state of Montana. Okay, so this is the same data, but really just shrunken down to really look at March 8th through our current status. So this is looking at the business layoffs and then the workers affected, but really just shrinking this down to our current situation and seeing actually the effect of COVID-19. So as you can see there, the business layoff events that happened in just a month basically were 206, and then we had 4,182 looking at number of workers affected. Okay, so another thing that we look at, in addition to unemployment claims, as well as business layoffs and the workers affected by those layoffs, we're monitoring our job postings, because this is showing us the businesses that are hiring or actually not hiring due to having to let employees go, but also being under hiring freezes because of COVID-19. And so again, this is looking at the state as a whole. If you look toward the end, we're looking at January 2020, and then obviously further on into March and April, you can see how that's ticking down as people have discontinued posting jobs due to some hiring freezes. Okay, so that's the state level. Now we'd like to look specifically at Yellowstone County. So this is looking at the initial claims, unemployment claims for Yellowstone County, and you can see it's highlighted here, and then the map again from 2016 to our current situation. And really by April 4th, they were looking at 3,719 initial claims for Yellowstone County. And continued claims, so anybody continuing a claim, is what we were looking at 7,712 by the week ending of April 4th, 2020. Okay, so now this is looking at the full map of Montana broken down to counties, and this is actually the numeric change in initial claims over the year. So this is looking at up to March of 2020. You can see Yellowstone County there is at 4,594 claims. Nice comparison if you look over to the left there at Gallatin County, 3,959 initial claims. And this is really great. This is showing actually the percentage of change in initial claims by that month over a year. So if you look at Yellowstone County, what that's saying is that March of 2019 compared to March of 2020, we've seen an increase of 653.5% of initial claims being issued. And then if you look at Gallatin County, they're at 982.4% increase of numeric claims from March of 2019 to March of 2020. Okay, so this was a nice graph that we had done looking at those job postings again. So how many people are posting for jobs in comparison of Yellowstone County versus Montana versus the whole United States. And what you can see is all three, if you can find March 17th there, all three of us dipped. Yellowstone County is in that dark blue, so we took the biggest hit there of all three, Yellowstone County, Montana, the United States. But then as we kind of come back around, you can see that then where we're at right now, Yellowstone County is unfortunately having less job postings. We're at a decline of 10.5% in comparison to the entire state of Montana, which is down 4.2%, but we're not quite as hit hard as the entire United States, which is down 18.0%. Now this was as of March 31st of 2020, so these numbers probably look a little bit differently to where we are at right now. So that's a quick overview of what we're looking at as far as workforce and the impact of COVID-19. Again, all of those numbers are on the Department of Labor and Industry's website. So please feel free to use that. It's a great link and it keeps updated information. And then of course, as your economic development partners, Big Sky Economic Development will continue to update these numbers and bring you this so that you can make really intentional and calculated decisions about your business. Anything else, Allison?
I would just say that while we're collecting economic impact data, we're also working hard to support businesses of all sizes. So please reach out to Big Sky Economic Development, contact at Big Sky Big Sky EDA is the website, or is the email address, so contact at Big Sky EDA if you have business questions. Of course, you have our contact information there as well if you have any questions. And again, the numbers that I shared are preliminary, just looking at trends that they see nationwide applied to our community. So as those, as the schools of thought progress, we'll certainly update those and truly try to help us all get our arms around what the economic impact looks like for our community and what recovery looks like as well.
Okay, with that, we will send you off, and know that Allison and I will continue to update this information and provide it to the community as quickly as we can. But of course, we hope that you are all staying safe and healthy, and we look forward to seeing you via screen very soon.